Assalamu alaikum. Respected chair, presenting dignitaries, dear friends. At the very outset, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to present in front of this august gathering. And my experience in the field of academia is very limited. What I'm trying to do is that, or what I'm going to present is my observation while working on the everyday life of Muslim communities, especially from the debate of textual and lived Islam. And I will highlight some of the main points of my paper. Studies on Islamic communities in recent times have gained much attention owing to the swift dispersal of Islam as a religious faith in South Asia. Most of the early studies on Islam in South Asia in general and India in particular have professed it as a monolithic model based on the textual aspects of Islam, which advocates universal or standard Islam. Later, scholars conducted studies on the everyday lives of the followers of Islam and brought forth a polyolithic model of Islam which looks for versions and variations in Islam based on culture contact of Muslim communities with local cultural environments. The Indian Islamic communities, in connection with other communities in which they are located, went through a process of acculturation and enculturation, thereby inculcating several practices that are otherwise not mentioned in the sacred text. The local practices are interpreted in order to get absorbed into the religious dogma through the textualization process. As a result, new texts started emerging and redefining the existing literatures. Then I will try to move to look at what are the basics or what are the major theoretical debates by different scholars when they work on the different Muslim communities in South Asia. So there are multiple approaches used by different scholars to the study of the Islamic community and its development in South Asia. One of the early models developed by Imtiaz Ahmad is known as the equilibrium model, according to which there are two elements of Islam. One is ultimate and formal, derived from the Islamic text, which we call it as the textual Islam, and the other proximate and local, validated by custom, which he called it as what? Lived Islam. Islam has come from the civilization of the Middle East but adjusted itself into the local cultural traditions by putting Islamic content into them. Therefore, according to Imtiaz Ahmad, these two elements, that is Islamic text and local custom, go hand in hand by the principle of equilibrium for the peaceful coexistence of Islam. Whereas another scholar like Francis Robinson opposed Imtiaz Ahmad's equilibrium model and argued that Ahmad looks at the short-term process of Muslim community in India, ignoring the rising Islamic movements which could break the equilibrium between these traditions, giving many examples of rising awareness among Indian Muslims about what Islam is and what it should be. Robinson argued that Islam provides a pattern of perfection based on the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet, which creates a common law for all Muslims. This ideal is spread to the other regions, which often seems to draw men towards higher Islamic standards. In another sense, the ideal Islam, which spreads to different parts of the world, pull out the local practices and impose its authority over the local. This gradient of Islamization model, or perfect Islam, according to Francis Robinson, privileged ideal textual Islam based on the reformist movement and the preachings of religious scholars. As a historian, Robinson is talking about a long process in which Muslim practices would ultimately fall in line with the ideal textual Islam. Criticizing Ahmad's and Robinson's view, Venadas argues that both means Ahmad and Robinson's are interested in the single pattern of Islam which craves for perfection. Thus opined that the scripture of Islam elaborated in folk theology is to give a very different meaning and content to the notion of Islamic perfection than both Ahmad and Robinson would be prepared to admit. Whereas Ernest Gellner, who worked on the Muslim Society of Morocco, came up with the pendulum swing theory of Islam. According to Gellner, Morocco has two types of religiosity in Islam. One is scriptural and egalitarian, and the other saintly and hierarchical. The scriptural and egalitarian Islam is founded on textual Islam, which is popular in the urban and industrialized part of Muslim society. And the saintly and hierarchical Islam, according to Gellner, rests with the rural society backed by the Sufi brotherhood tradition. The former he considered as high and the latter as low culture of Islam. T.N. Madan considered Gellner's idea of Islam as a cyclical model of Islam. So even if you look at the works of Asim Roy and Joyce Flokiger also, they also trying to look at the same model of Islamic practices. In the sense, Asim Roy studied the Bengali Muslims and identified the emergence of accommodation and adjustment nature of syncretic tradition. Islamic conversion in Bengal forced a break in the pre-conversion cultural continuity between the great and little traditions of the converts. Joyce Flokiger proposed a vernacular Islam within the universalistic Islam through the study of healing practices of a woman healer from South India. Flokiger called this popular healing practice and experience, call it as what, vernacular Islam. She took her notion of vernacular from the linguistics, which is the language or dialect used in a particular social and geographical area. This vernacular language is opposed to the standard forms of language that crosses social and geographical boundaries. Likewise, in Islam, a standard form has one that has existed with the authority of the Quran and the tenets. The vernacular form of Islam lies in the believer's local practices, custom and traditions. So the idea is that even if you look at the existing studies or most of the existing studies related to Islam in South Asia by Ahmad, Robinson, Flokiger, Veena Das, you can see or we can surmise from the discussion that the scholars, all the scholars envisaged the prevalence of dualism in Islam. One is the textual, another is the lived Islam. This dualism is postulated based on the existence of two practices that are separable and can be studied independently, right? So the whole debate on the subject of South Asian Islam, as reviewed above, would reveal that the scholars envisaged Islam as consisting two segments, that is textual and the lived. Therefore, scholars argued for equilibrium model, cyclical model and hierarchical model. This debate is fundamentally grounded on the principles of differentiation, which itself is a modernist approach to human sciences. So even if you look at almost all the scholars, okay, what they are trying to look at is that they try to divide Islam. One is in textual Islam, another is the lived Islam, right? So this itself is a notion of the modernity. Modernity has tried to look at everything in the world from the prism or through the prism of these binaries: savage, civilized, lived, textual. So looking the things from the binary, right? Okay. So the idea is that even when they studied about or create different theoretical model about South Asian Islam, okay, or different communities, the methodological issues is one of the main reason behind when they reach all these theoretical debates. So I will come back to this point by connecting another debate by a French psychoanalyst. His name is Jacques Lacan. Lacan has used a particular formula or particular analytical tool which you all are familiar with, which we call it as what? The mirror stage, right? So two different kinds of looking at the things. Okay, here since I began by making a statement on the vastness of studies on Muslims, I also reminded of an important seminar presentation by Jacques Lacan, the mirror stage. Okay, that is the name of the seminar. I think it is in the year 1936 that he make this presentation. So it is about a children's ability to identify his or her own image. And it was in the 30s that a lot of scientific experiments are conducted on these particular aspects. So the biologist holding a mirror in front of a chimpanzee and seeing their reaction, and ultimately it was found that the human infant is the only animal capable of identifying its own image, and this is the substance of the seminar presented by Jacques Lacan. Is a psychoanalyst. So he found that, or his argument is that, an infant finding its own image reflected in the mirror and distinguishing or identifying its own image. We are capable of identifying our own image. I will try to argue that the vastness of the studies on Muslims, and this is the mirrors of our existence. We found that reflected in all these images, good, bad, or distorted images, right? Some of the images are also debatable, right? So when you look at all this process, right? Okay. So the necessity from our own part is that to question some of the assumptions behind this power knowledge equation. In the sense, most of the scholars, what they did is that they already created their own theoretical argument, and based on that theoretical argument, even before they try to engage with the field data, what they did is that they already created a theoretical or a kind of methodological tool, which means that a procedure of inquiry. In the sense, when you studied about Muslims in Morocco, how will you study? Well, you look at the Muslims from the prism of either in the textual or the lived Islam. Right? Okay. Well, the same case happened when Joseph Lokiger studied Muslims in Hyderabad, right? Okay. So they also use this particular formula. When you look at all this idea by Imtiaz Ahmad, Robinson, Flokiger, Vinadas, or Asim Roy, all these people have used this particular this particular methodology, in the sense procedure of inquiry. So the question here comes, okay, for whose sake we produce knowledge? Right. So all these scholars have put their own theoretical idea related to Islam in South Asia, but the basic idea is that for whose sake we produce knowledge. If it is for the sake of the Muslim community, what could be the methodology for that? Okay. Whose view has to whose view has to get much attention, or whether it is the researchers' opinion or the community which the researchers are trying to study. Right, okay. So what most of the scholars did is that they try to highlight or try to impose their theoretical argument over the data which they have collected, right, and try to reach a kind of conclusion that Islam has two parts. One we call it as what? The lived Islam, and there is the textual Islam. But the question is that, can we separate or can we create this kind of binary? Whether the lived Islam exists without the help of a textual Islam, or whether textual Islam exists without the help of the lived Islam. So one has to look at, okay, this is a process, or this is the project modernity has, I'm repeating, this is the project where modernity has tried to elaborate, and instead of looking this binary, one has to look at Muslim community, the diversity of the Muslim community, rather than putting Islam as binary. One is textual, another is lived Islam, right? Okay. If we follow the same project of the modernity, okay, and it will create a kind of division within the community itself, right? Okay. One can see multiple Muslim communities, but one cannot see multiple Islam. That is my argument. Thank you.